Next set that we're going to do here is the rock cycle. As we move through the rock cycle, remember that we're looking at processes, we're looking at the way that the rocks form and the processes and the things that make the rock. So as we're looking through this, we'll talk about things like magma and lava. We'll talk about things like sediment, pressure, composition, those types of things. So as we're looking at the rock cycle, it's going to be something that's building on all of the different types of rocks that we looked at, and it's kind of circling back to what we did early on with the rock cycle, with the information that we've covered. This one, you're just going to put together this diagram in your notebook. So you should have a page dedicated to this diagram. You're more than welcome to color code it, as I have as we've gone through the slideshow. There will be color pencils available to you if you want them. If you choose to use them, it's not a bad idea to see where the paths are and how they take you through the rock cycle. As we begin, there should be 3 different types of rocks that are going to be described as we look through these. So you've got igneous rocks. See them at the top of where you're going to make this diagram. Sedimentary rocks, you see them down at the bottom right of where you're going to make this diagram. And metamorphic rocks. Those are going to be the 3 types of rocks that we're looking at as we work our way through this diagram. You've read about these, you've done assignments about these, you've listened to lectures about these, you've written notes about these, so you should be familiar with these as far as putting this all together. But I kind of want you to be able to put this into the diagram and understand what you're doing as you look through the different processes and understand which processes are unique to the different types of rocks. We'll start with the igneous rocks, since Earth most likely was igneous as the whole body at some point in time. So the whole body of the Earth at some point in time was probably igneous material, magma and lava. From there, it started to cool and you started to get the formation of igneous rocks. So as we look at this, I'm going to take it from metamorphic rocks to the igneous rocks as far as what's being done, what's happening in order to get to that point, what we're looking at in terms of the processes. So the first thing that we look at here is we've got melting of that rock. Whatever type of rock we're talking about, it's going to have to melt in order to eventually become an igneous rock. When it melts, it's going to form magma or lava, which is going to then cool and crystallize to form those igneous rocks. So there are some other terms in here, or some other information in here that you're going to want to include as well. The things that cause rocks to melt, as we're looking at this, are going to be heat and pressure. And there's a couple ways that you get that heat and pressure. Some of it's just going to be from plate movement. And as the lithospheric plates, the tectonic plates that are on the surface of the Earth move around, you're talking tons and tons of material that are slamming into each other. Of course there's going to be pressure, and of course there's going to be heat. So that pressure and heat are going to be one of the things that cause that rock to melt sometimes. Another one is the radioactive decay of radioactive elements that are down in the core and the lower part of the mantle. As those decay, again, energy is given off, and as that energy is given off, it heats up the rocks, which eventually melt. That melted rock is going to form magma or lava, which eventually is going to cool and crystallize to form those igneous rocks. So that is the first pathway that you want. You also want to know those terms that go along with it. What forms each of these things? So melting forms the magma or lava. The cooling is going to allow the rock to crystallize, which is going to form your igneous rocks. Next, what you've got is you've got those igneous rocks, or any type of rock, being broken down by weathering. So the different processes that are happening in the atmosphere or around the surface of the Earth are going to break down whatever type of rock we're talking about through the process of weathering to make what's known as sediment, pieces, parts. And some of that sediment can be chemical sediment if minerals are dissolving in water and becoming part of the system. So you've got this change in that rock. It's being broken down from what it originally was, either into smaller pieces or into something that is dissolved in water. Again, that makes sediment. The sediment is going to be carried by erosion, and we talked about the different agents of erosion. We talked about wind, we talked about water, we talked about gravity, we talked about those things. Those are the agents of erosion, which have some energy associated with them, which means that they're going to be able to carry that sediment certain distances. Now, as those agents lose some of that energy to their surroundings for whatever reason, if the slope decreases of the land mass, if friction acts on the atmosphere or the water or what have you, those agents lose some of that energy to what's around them. So as they lose some of that energy, they drop those sediments. And that was some of your graded bedding and some of the grading of the rock that you read about in the interactive reading. But it drops those sediments through the process known as deposition. As more and more of that material is deposited, what's going to happen is that sediment is going to be squeezed by what's known as compaction. So that compaction is going to squeeze the spaces out, squeeze most of the water out from between those sediments. And then eventually what's going to happen through the process of cementation, which glues those things together, it's held together by those dissolved minerals that were in the water that moved through the sediments through the process of cementation. That cementation, holding those sediments together, forms clastic sedimentary rocks. But you can also have chemical sedimentary rocks, which are just the cement part of this, where the water evaporates and it leaves behind those chemicals, those minerals, to form those chemical sedimentary rocks. It can also be from organic material like shells or decaying organisms, things that form coal and such. So that cementation, in this case, what we're looking at is something that holds the sediments together in the clastic sedimentary rocks and then forms those sedimentary rocks. From there, we're going to move through to metamorphic rocks. And as we move through to those metamorphic rocks, as we form those metamorphic rocks, the two main things that are going to cause those metamorphic rocks to form are going to be heat and pressure. And again, that's going to be caused by radioactive decay. That's going to be caused by plate movement. That's going to be caused by overlying rock layers. So those things are going to cause that heat and pressure. Some of that heat can also be supplied through plate tectonics, through magma moving into certain areas, and that magma pocket, that magma chamber, heating up the rocks that are around it, not to the point of melting, but to the point where the atoms can rearrange and they change those rocks. So again, it's going to be heat and pressure changes that we're looking at here as we work our way through this. So you've got those metamorphic rocks that are going to be changed from what original state it was. In this case, we're looking at the path from sedimentary rocks. Here in just a second, what we'll do is we'll kind of move our way through the other paths that can be taken as far as changing these rocks, making these rocks, forming these rocks of different types. But this is the path around the outside of the rock cycle. So you want the little terms that go along with that, as well as the types of rocks and the processes that are involved in the formation of each of those types of rocks, or the things that contribute to that. As we move forward, we will look at the path, first of all, that rocks would take to get to metamorphic rocks. And notice that I've added in the center here 2 arrows. Both of those arrows are pointing to that heat, again, that I talked about on the previous slide. So what you're going to have happen is igneous rocks, if they undergo a process that heats them up, not to the point of melting again, but to the point where the minerals and the elements are going to change their formation within that rock, you're going to wind up with a metamorphic rock as it's put under that heat and pressure. Same thing can happen to metamorphic rocks. So if you'll notice now, you've got 3 arrows pointing, one from sedimentary rocks, one from igneous rocks, one from metamorphic rocks, toward the heat that's going to cause that change. Not to the point of melting, but to the point of changing those rocks from what they originally were. Moving forward again, now what we'll do is we'll add some arrows to the melting. Sedimentary rocks can melt as well as they are carried down under the surface or as layers build up on top as they're exposed to different things. Igneous rocks, same thing. They can remelt. They can form that magma or lava again and recrystallize and form igneous rocks again. So now you should have 3 arrows of the 3 different types of rocks pointing into melting. One from metamorphic rocks, one from sedimentary rocks, and one from igneous rocks that are pointing to that melting. And once things melt, then what you're looking at is you're looking at forming those igneous rocks when it cools, when it solidifies at that point. So that's the processes, again, that are going to form those igneous rocks. The final set that we look at here will take us from sedimentary rocks that are weathered and go through the processes that then form sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks now that are going to the weathering process and going through those processes that then form sedimentary rocks again. So now you have all 3 types of rocks that move through the weathering process, that makes sediment, that is eroded and moves through. So as we're looking at this, do understand that you've got these different types of rocks that are going to be changed, they're going to be broken down, they're going to move through the rock cycle, things like that are going to happen in order for those rocks to form the 3 different types. So this is the rock cycle. This is what is going to change the rocks, move them into the system. This is what gets those nutrients, those elements, those things that we need as organisms into the system. And it recycles those rocks. It makes those rocks again. It moves them through so that all of those elements, all of those atoms, all of those materials aren't locked up in these rocks. So the Earth is a very intricate system along those lines. There's things that are always changing. There's details that are always changing. We need stuff from the rocks as well as the water and the atmosphere in order to survive. If they're not made available to us through these processes that we've been talking about, we're not going to be here as organisms. No organisms are going to be here at that point. So it's kind of important to understand where the necessary things for us as living things come from, and this is part of it. This gets those nutrients, those elements, those atoms back into the system, which then can move through producers and consumers and all of that type of stuff that allows living things to move energy through themselves, to build themselves, to do all of that type of stuff. So this rock cycle is vitally important, the same as the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle and all of the different types of cycles we've talked about. So that's where we're at with this. We'll build from there. We'll probably do a couple labs as we move forward, identifying some rocks and doing some things like that. But this is the end of the rock notes. So we'll build from there. We'll review a little bit, and we'll probably test over this sometime within the next few days.